Hi, I'm Lisa McInerney. I'm going to do a little reading for my friends at Hot Press. I'm going to read a little bit from my third novel, which is called The Rules of Revelation. And it's a novel about reinventing yourself. It's about music. It's about coming back to Ireland and making art, even though you're not actually quite sure you're allowed to. So the bit I'm going to read is from the point of view of the character Mel, who's from the north side of Cork City and is in a 5-piece band at the moment, covering for somebody called Izzy, a guitarist who's broken her hand. And Mel is in this band with her former next door neighbour, Rain. And Izzy has just reminded Mel of a terrible thing that happened between their two houses when Ryan was 15. So that's the bit I'm going to read. Mel was stuck with disappointment, a cowardly emotion because it was meant to be buried. It was defeat that went nowhere and could be channeled into nothing. It was not meant to be anyone's imposition. Mel felt forced into it because she was not meant to confront Ryan with what Izzy had disclosed on his behalf. It would have been cruel, definitely unsightly, and irreparably damaging to the vibe. She could not decide whether she wanted Natalie to have given Ryan a heads up, which would mean they'd be working towards the same goal, suppression of a private fact, which would muddy the waters in terms of whether her passive behaviour could be classified as feminine, because she would like to think she was just being Mel and not your common or garden girl. Angry? No, I'm just disappointed. Or whether she wanted Natalie to have said nothing at all, only maybe to have asked him probing questions or given him sympathetic, unreadable looks. That way it would disappear quickly. Izzy was in on top of her all day, every day. Izzy had found a friend. And that would be a noble gesture if Izzy had not also given this friend a land, which soured any overtures she was trying to make. No one could switch off to the extent that they forgot the person they were talking to was born of a degenerate mother with a taste for teenage boys. And who wanted a new friend who knew that sort of thing? Friendship rarely had to blossom out of brutal honesty, and Mel had come home to Ireland to be reborn, not to keep kicking up the same old dirt, making the same old excuses and apologies. She didn't blame Ryan, really. The reason the whole thing was so awful was that at his age he'd been blameless, legally speaking anyway. She was just pissed off that she had to carry this around with her when she'd packed so lightly for the journey home. They were writing chords and lyrics, and she was aping Izzy well, taking Izzy's ideas to make them sound as Izzy would if her hand wasn't banjaxed. But she could feel the weight of it the whole time, as could Ryan, whose head bowed further and further, who must have a terrible crick in his neck. Izzy had ideas about theme and form, and they were, each one, shot through with gender politics. For example, Izzy said that women could carry heavier loads, because women's bodies were meant to be vessels. Within the woman was always some space to be filled, whether or not she wished to fill it. In a sense, a woman was hollow and a man was solid. And Mel felt this as a threat, but Izzy did not. She went on and on about it in the writing sessions. She said that such ideas ran through her like chemical imbalances, stimulating and euphoric, which made Izzy as intimidating to Mel as the sort of body that they both inhabited. The lads were not disturbed by these ideas. They seemed instead not to understand them. Izzy supposed loudly that there was nothing surprising about that, because men weren't interested in any experience which didn't mirror their own. This made Mel feel even more distinct from the lads, even more sequestered by Izzy, who was tactile or grabby, depending on how confident Mel felt on any given day. And the days were flying by, and Izzy's ideas seemed more and more insistent. And so sometimes Mel thought she was being churlish and not wanting to be on Izzy's side. Mel, tell him. Mel, you know what I mean, right? See how Mel coaxed out that guitar line? Mel gets it. Mel gets me. And sometimes she felt as though her own ideas, her own body, her own fucking self was weak and woeful next to this force of nature, Izzy King, who held her own and fought her corner and said she would never stop advocating for women's voices, and looked pointedly and reassuringly at Mel as she did so. Remembering this kept Mel awake when she needed to sleep, and she thought of women's voices and how they birthed into sound ideas about femininity or the rejection of femininity, and she wondered how they did it and why they were not at war with themselves as she was. Janelle Monáe, Patti Smith, Alanis Morissette, Nina Simone, Roisin Murphy, Tori Amos, Denise Chila, Sarah Slean, Kathleen Hanna, Christine McVie's sister Rosetta. Just like them, her job was to find the extraordinary in the ordinary and word it in such a manner that it brought everyone who heard her closer to insight. But unlike them, she couldn't, being at war with herself, being out of sync in sickening perpetuity. She felt the words come to her in specific lyrics in the correct order, but she could only ever find the first couple, and the rest of the lines stayed just out of her grasp, as if she had caught the first few words of a scintillating secret, but lost the rest and had to make it up based on her own narrow understanding of the scandal. And now with Lord Urchin, Izzy kept putting her arm around Mel's waist and saying things like, "We are Tracy Emin's bed, the lads are the great exhibition at the Crystal Palace." When for Mel, Crystal Palace was a football team. Not that it mattered to Izzy who Mel was, as long as she remained a receptacle for Izzy's ideas, a vessel, as it were. And not that it mattered to Ryan, only what Mel was evocative of. How, then, could she not be disappointed? Regarding the comment underneath Izzy's blog and the request from the journalist, Ryan did exactly what Natalie had predicted. Mel didn't witness this, but read it on his face afterwards. He was pale to the point of being a little green. He didn't recover from the jet lag. He spent much time sitting on the wall outside the house, smoking joints and staring at his phone, which was odd, as his phone could hardly pick up the Wi-Fi from there. Mel even went out to check. The bandmates argued about it the evening Natalie and Cullum left. Izzy was the most vocal. She said that it wasn't right for one of 5 to be interviewed, that Lord Urchin was a unit, not Ryan's backing band. "How would you all like it," she asked, "if I was interviewed because I'm a female guitarist in a male-dominated industry? The spotlight would be just on me, which would set a terrible precedent." She did not look like she thought this would set a terrible precedent. "This journalist says she's interested in the working class voice angle," Joseph replied, "and Natalie thinks that's code for bow little drug dealing voice angle. So we have to be so careful. Ignore it and we might have lost our best chance of setting our own agenda. Like if we do this right, we grab attention and we won't just have another debut album. We'll be the band that recorded on 2 separate continents. We have this big political declaration of arrival." "Joe," Ryan said, "Joe, stall the fuck on. There'll be no declaration." "What kind of world are you living in, boy? You can't just go, 'Oh, the juicy thing.' I'm not telling you about the juicy thing." Yeah, I can. That's kind of a stipulation of the world I'm living in." "Ryan, boy, I'd love to launch an album of people who only care about the music, but I don't think there are enough of those to cover the costs of recording the fucking thing. Likes of us don't give 2 shits about ex-drug dealers, but other fuckers give multiple shits. They need their questions answered. Do not think you can hide from this." "Joe, I'm not worried about fucking journalists and gig goers." Izzy stood up. "Ryan absolutely needs to come clean. What I'm saying is he can come clean as part of an ensemble. We all have our stories." Ryan did not stand to face her, but lifted his chin and raised his voice further. "I have fuck all to come clean about." Joseph gently put it to Ryan that if he had nothing to come clean about, then he would hardly be so worried about the consequences of coming clean. He was being contradictory even here among friends. That's why he had to get his story straight. Come clean was the term Ryan couldn't get past. Izzy said it was just a turn of phrase. Ryan said nothing was just a turn of phrase. Izzy condescendingly supposed it was just like a baby lyricist to get tangled up in semantics. "If it really bothers you that much," she teased, "you must have an awful lot of secrets." Mel tried to shoot her a warning look, but Izzy would not meet her eyes. The juicy thing? Oh, Izzy could hardly keep a lid on the juicy thing. "God forbid I'm saying this to you for your own good," she said to Ryan. "Honestly, I think you need to own your past." "Own my past? What fucking self-help books have you been reading, girl?" "Oh, it's not the first time I've told you that," Izzy said, as if just remembering it, and he looked at her as if uninterested in remembering it himself. But it came up on him. He dropped his head as Joseph started speaking again. He stared at his lap. Thank you.